tomorrow we are launching 2 new bodies of oral histories. I think tomorrow. Definitely tomorrow. We have a group of East Village oral histories, and we have a group of oral histories from folks in the South Village, which, as you probably know, is an area that we have been working very hard to create historic districts in, and although we have Historic District 1 and 2, we are not finished. We want Historic District number 3 in the South Village. But tonight is all about the East Village, and Liza Zapol has talked to some incredibly interesting people, some of whom are here tonight, and we are going to point out Marilyn Appleberg, and Albert Babauzi, and Riley Smallberg. I think that is Tom is here, Tom Birchard. We're so glad that you all are here. Thank you. And thank you for giving us your time and your stories. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, how amazing the living histories are among us. So I'm going to skip forward here real fast to show you that this is where you're going to go tomorrow. Maybe we'll email it to you,
yes,
or you can try
absolutely.
to write it down. But this is where we have 9 oral histories that will debut tomorrow, with 3 more to come that are still in process. And we'll come back to that. This is the page, so that you're going to have a good time with. So, so what we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit about oral histories. What are oral histories? Liza's experience with that. And then we're going to listen to some clips, to some short clips from the oral histories, and talk more about those. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. So if you have any thoughts or questions, just save them until the end, and we'll get there. So let's see. So it's funny because Liza is usually in the position of asking people questions, and tonight she gets to answer questions. My experience is in journalism, and neither of us like answering questions. We like asking them. So bear with us, and we're glad that Liza is submitting to being on the answering end tonight. So let's see, Liza, maybe you can tell us. A lot of us, we've heard of oral histories, but we don't really know what is that. How is that different from an interview, or that we read in the newspaper, or here on NPR? What is an oral history, and what motivated you to pursue that?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that isn't necessary. It sort of depends on whom you ask in terms of what is oral history, but the way that I define oral history is a life history interview, which sort of is expansive in its own way. And for here, for example, when talking about the East Village, I might begin with people talking about where they're from and their childhood, even if it began elsewhere. But then, the focus of the interview would be in talking about the East Village itself. The interviews tend to be about an hour and a half to 3 hours long, and sometimes it's in one session, sometimes it's in 2 sessions, and some oral historians will go for many more than that. But the idea is that you give people the time so that you can understand how they see the world and how they make meaning by understanding how their formative experiences as well. And then how I got interested or involved in oral history. I am inquisitive, and I grew up quite an inquisitive child. And some might say that I was nosy. I asked a lot of questions, and then the way that I sort of I was curious about people's character, and the way that I approached character was as a performer. So I would kind of perform people's stories back to them, or I would even then also approach plays and scripts. So I studied theater originally. And then around the time of when I was in high school was when Steven Spielberg funded the Shoah Foundation project, which was a large-scale oral history project interviewing Holocaust survivors, which is a very big video project and now extends to testimonies beyond the Holocaust. And I became aware of that because friends, relatives in my family were interviewed for that project. And then also, there was a sort of, at the same time in high school was when I became aware of Anna Deere-Smith, who's a performer and activist in her own way, and she would create performances based on interviews with people around major events like the Crown Heights riots or the Rodney King riots.
Do you remember what that show was called? That was the first one.
Fires in the Mirror was the
Right.
one in Crown Heights, and Twilight was the one in LA. So then I became interested in interviewing and being able to perform those characters on stage.
So where are your interviewees here? Liza will let you know if she's going to perform.
Yes.
Excuse me, it's a little blurry. Is it a way of focusing it more? Or is that
I think that's
It's,
where we're
it's
at.
unfortunately it's a low resolution image, and that was the best we could get. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to read this for you anyway. So
I'll get to this photo in a second. So then I became more interested in the interview itself, and I sort of thought that as opposed to me mediating the person's story, that really through voice and through listening to that person's voice and through the oral history, and usually I record audio and not video, that's a way to bring people's own stories closer to the public, and that people can really learn from their stories more directly. But I also see performance in the interview itself, and I'm interested in engaging audiences and listening to the oral histories. And then what this photograph is about is one of my first projects was about Lower East Side multi-generational Jewish family businesses, and which was for the Tenement Museum. And the way that as I was engaging in that project, I realized that I have my own story about that, which is this third mustachioed gentleman from me is Nicholas Paley, who is my great-grandfather. And he and his brothers had a photography studio, or had several photography studios around Manhattan, and that one was on Rivington Street. So
I'm actually going to read, this says Paley, and this says, this says brothers. It's sort of brothers, because there's no TH in Yiddish. And this actually says photographers, spelled out phonetically. I was reading it in higher resolution. So, anyway.
I have more advertisements to bring to you for you to
I'll check. But right, so Liza, you have a very personal connection to the idea, to generations, to family stories, and to that being rooted right here. And you're not a native New Yorker yourself. But
No.
You've been here for a while.
Right, yeah.
And so you started learning about your own family history.
Yeah, I learned about their history. I interviewed my mother for this project, but then I was also interested in, like Strike's Matzah, Economy Candy, one of the old linen stores in the Lower East Side, why some of those multi-generational Jewish family businesses were still there in a neighborhood that wasn't predominantly Jewish anymore, and what their relationship to space was. So kind of how space shapes our lives and memories, and how we're marked by the history of a place in our daily lives, and then how we convey struggles over space to others, which then translates, I think, to this project.
Yeah, those are big themes, as we all know, in East Village, Lower East Side, maybe in all of New York today, but certainly here in our neighborhoods, how we're shaped by our neighborhood, with whom we live, and with whom we struggle over our turf. And these are all themes that came out in your interviews. Tell us one thing that I'm curious about, and I bet other people are too, is, we all know how fickle memory is. So tell us about the relationship between oral history and fact. If we have any fact checkers who want to listen to oral history, nitpick.
Well, that's a great question, and I think oral historians tend to say that oral history is interested in memory, or pertains to memory as opposed to fact. So what do you remember, and why do you remember that? And why are those salient to the way that you see yourself now? So if you misremember something, then maybe there's a reason you shifted the years, because maybe that's you constructed around some idea of your past. There's a lot of writing about that, and so while yes, we're interested in fact in that you can go back to the oral history and to the transcript, and you can go through with your narrators and check for the facts, check for the dates.
Right.
Also, just looking at how why people are choosing the specific stories that they choose. So yeah, it's a little different from journalism in that way.
Right. And we're going to get to the clips in a moment here, but let's talk a little bit more, just briefly, about relation to place and your own education in preservation. You were talking to a lot of people about the idea of preservation and about the importance of neighborhood. Obviously, you guys know GVSHP. We're all about river to river, 14th to Houston. This is our heart and soul. And it was a bit of an education for you, even despite your your experience.
Yeah, I mean, in this, I learned a lot about like what is the East Village, and how do people conceive of the East Village. Like some people would say, no, it's the Lower East Side, or when I came here, it was considered the Lower East Side, and if it was the East Village, it would, that was a gentrifying concept. Or it was Loew and I see myself as living in Loew and these are all linked to people's own politics. So I certainly learned about that and the ways that people define space. And that is, I think, linked to preservation as well. I also learned a lot about the individual person's ability to impact change, to really make a difference. And in each of these stories, even amongst the rapid and sometimes destructive change in New York City, I mean, they're interviewing Fran Golden, who was involved in the battles against Robert Moses. Very clearly, one person against a giant, but not just one person, being part of a much larger movement and talking about how you build a movement. Her interview, among others, can be like test cases for activism. Her 50-year fight for Cooper Square. And then even in the individual, like Wolf Kahn, a painter I interviewed, who's a wonderful color field painter. He talked about the one time he felt really connected to the neighborhood was when he was involved in fighting housing discrimination in the East Village. So he would sign a lease, and then his African American friends would move in several different apartment buildings, and this is in the 50s, early 60s.
And for some of us who grew up when there was Blockbuster Video, I didn't know that that's what Blockbuster meant. He was a Blockbuster. Right?
And I think that term, like, that means something to him, and then that term can also mean almost a different thing to other people, which I learned. So it can also mean people who inflate housing prices but allow African Americans to move into a neighborhood, which will then deflate housing prices at a certain time. So he uses that term, and then I'm interested in how did he get to use that, or where did he learn that term, and how did that term change? But yeah, so I think hearing about the intersections of personal history and then history with a capital H. Like people talked about September 11th, people talked about Stonewall, the AIDS crisis and through very personal experiences.
And we had several refugees from World War II.
Yep, yeah. So people's daily life of the neighborhood, and then how these major things impact the neighborhood and how that's seen in place. I think that's a part of, linking the buildings, the space that people live in, and the lives that we lead within them.
Right. And something that Liza noticed in talking to people is so often people come to the village to be part of something, right? We're seeking freedom, we're seeking art, we're seeking connection, and we revere history. And then you come here and you find yourself a part of it. Phil Hartman, who we're about to hear from, who was a filmmaker and the owner of Two Boots Pizza, reveres Jonas Mekas, who we're also going to hear from, the founder of the Anthology Film Archive. Now they know each other, right? So we come here because of what we revere, and then we meet the very people that we've been reading about. Our own histories become part of history with a capital H, and that's part of the magic of the village. And that is something that you heard, I think, over and over again. In fact, I have to mention a story Liza has heard me tell. The painter Wolf Kahn, who just paints gorgeous canvases, I knew of because I lived in Chelsea, right across from his studio. I was looking into his studio. And I didn't know who it was. There were these, I could barely see through, and there were these gorgeous, colorful canvases, and then someone told me, oh, that's Wolf Kahn, and I didn't even know the name, and then I learned about him. And so now I have a personal connection to a truly great contemporary painter whose story you can hear. And we're going to go to the clips, but I just want to show you again when you go here tomorrow to walk you through it, and apologies for the resolution here. But we have our East Village collection, and by the way, we have two previous wonderful collections of oral histories of preservation pioneers, people like Ed Fancher, Margaret Gale, Doris Diether. That's another collection on our website. We have people involved in the creation of the Westbeth artists' housing, and maybe that. But we have those two, and now we have East Village. And so what you have is, we've got Marilyn at the top. You're used to coming first in the alphabet, with a little blurb, each person with a blurb, and then you come down and you've got your blurb again. On the left, you can listen to a short audio clip. You can look at a beautiful photo. You can read the transcript, and, oh, I've got a pointer here. You can read the transcript of the clip, then you press this, and you can listen to all 1.5, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then here you can read the transcript. So it's all there, and this is history. So thanks to Liza. So why don't we go to our first clip of Phil Hartman, who unfortunately isn't here tonight, but he is the owner of Two Boots Pizza, which is at this point, this was the first location. At this point, it is a nationwide chain. He's also our partner in our historic plaque program. And his daughter even helped us with this project, one of his 3 children. So let's hear his clip.
My name is Phil Hartman. I usually go by Phil. And I was born in Brooklyn at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, which no longer exists. I will always love the East Village. I love the physique of the East Village, like the way a man or a woman would look at another man or woman and love their body. I love the East Village's body. I love the regularity of the cornices at the top of the tenements on the side streets. I love the scale of the East Village in general. I love the brick of the East Village. I love the trees of the East Village. I love the grid of the East Village. I love the history of the East Village. I love walking down the street knowing that Ed Sanders walked down that street, or that Allen Ginsberg sat under this tree, or that Jack Kerouac was photographed in front of this fence. And don't complain if the neighborhood's changing and like give up on it. You know, create things that are going to make sure that it stays as true to its history as possible. And so whether it's using the term oral histories, or keeping a softball league alive where one didn't exist before, we have the opportunity to create a legacy every day. And folks who abandon that responsibility are making a mistake. So that's our duty. Create a legacy every day.
The last thing is, it's our duty to create a legacy every day. So Phil is interesting for a lot of reasons, but here, you know, you have unadulterated love. You also have a charge to keep trying, you know, to not give up on this place, as disheartened as we all get sometimes about gentrification and change and seeing our beloved places disappear and seeing different kinds of developments that aren't what we want. I appreciate his charge to not give up, because a lot of us have felt, I think, that desire a little bit, that temptation. And he's saying, no, and this is somebody who has been through all the decades, and well, the 70s were the best, and the 80s were the best, the 90s were the best, and he's saying, don't give up. Tell us more about your interview with him.
Yeah, Phil, you know, I found Phil interesting because he grew up in Long Island in Great Neck, and he felt that it was a very conformist society, a Jewish community. He was Jewish as well. He is Jewish as well, and then he moved and went to Princeton because he did it sort of as a joke with a friend, and thought as a long-haired hippie, like, let's see if I can get in. And then he got in, and then he went, and he didn't like it. But then while he was in college, he came and worked at a store called Cinema, which it was, maybe some of you know, I think it was on 10th Street. And it was it was a place, you know, where a lot of film lovers went, but also a lot of the people who worked there with him were people who were starting the punk movement. And he became really...
Excuse me,
Punk rock.
what block of 10th Street?
A great question, and I don't have that answer right now, but it's in the oral history. So he became really involved in the punk movement and went to CBGBs and found his love in that, and then also in filmmaking, in independent filmmaking. So he became a part of this like countercultural space that the East Village is and was, and so this sort of finding that home, that new home for himself, was really interesting.
Right. And it's funny, by the way, Phil mentioning, you know, I want to sit under the tree that Allen Ginsberg sat under, or walk the streets that Jack Kerouac walked, just reminds me that we will have a lovely clip for you from David Amram, the composer and musician, and beat and sort of Zelig scenes of downtown life. And in his clip, which you'll find on our website, in the South Village collection, he even talks about walking down the street with Jack Kerouac. So they're all here, and that's wonderful. So how about our friend Marilyn and her clip? Oh, real fast, this is Marilyn's beautiful Stuyvesant Street and East 10th Street neighborhood. Still the president of the Block Association for life, which she also founded. And so these streets today, and right over here is St. Mark's Church, behind which on 11th Street is our office in the beautiful Neighborhood Preservation Center. And these streets today are as genteel as you would find, right, in the East Village. So let's hear what they were like back in the day.
My name is Marilyn Appelberg, and I am a 45-year resident of the East Village. Preservation was difficult. There was really no money down here. There were no famous names down here, no Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, no organizations like Greenwich Village Society or Historic Districts Council. The fact that the people who bought these houses and lived in these houses on Stuyvesant and 10th managed to do what they did is almost a miracle, because we really didn't get, as we were going along, any help from anyone. And the city administrations really saw this place because of all of the drugs and prostitution. Prostitution that went on day and night. 11th Street was, which even on later on NYPD Blue, they called 11th Street the Stroll. And no one picked up prostitutes on our street, they just consummated the business deal on our street. Sometimes during the day, against a wall.
We end on that. Marilyn has a lot more to say. Marilyn is
all as good as that.
right. Marilyn is a tremendous activist. She's the lady to go to when you want something done, and we have so much gratitude that we owe her for her efforts, including making this the beautiful, being a part of making this the beautiful place it is now. And so this is one view of change, one shard of change. We're going to hear a few more. I don't know if you want to say anything right now, Liza, about Marilyn and your conversation. Did you guys talk in your house?
We
Yes,
did,
okay.
yeah.
Photograph is under my roof.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
with
because,
the
you
beautiful
know,
roses.
the places where Liza got to speak with people, I think, matter, right? Because you have an intimate view, you hear more about people's relation to place, more about change. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with the people who were involved, like Marilyn, in being activists in their communities, there was this relationship to the space, like pointing out the window and being like, this, you know, I knew my view was going to be ruined if NYU built this building, you know, and so I wanted to be able to see the clock because I didn't have a watch, so somewhere else talked about it, you know. You know, that relationship to space that I got to experience also by being in the place with them was really interesting. And also, you know, being able to share that space where, of course, also narrators are comfortable and tend to be comfortable in their own homes. You know, also, Marilyn speaks about the legacy of activism being something that excited her about the neighborhood. You know, speaking about Fran Golden and Esther Rand as role models for her work was really great to see these kind of references to other oral histories and reflection.
And especially because now you're an inspiration to us now. So again, we're all making history ourselves every day. Oh, another thing about plays, Liza, I know you strive for quiet. Sometimes there are cats meowing and pots of soup bubbling, and you have all kinds of things going on too. I think you interviewed you've interviewed people in their places of work, and you kind of have to make do sometimes.
Right. Like, if in the South Village project, I interviewed Peter Longo of Puerto Rico Brewing Company, or importing company, and you know, the wonderful coffee shops. And we heard the roasting happening in the background, and I think it also becomes a part of the atmosphere of the space. Also tells the story of the space in its own way. So. At the same time, you know, the sound is important to me, and you know, having good sound is important. And Marcelo Enes, the sound producer, just came in, and he would help me in, you know, producing some of the sound so that it can be really good listening. You can listen to it, you know, on the subway like I do sometimes, and be able to hear things really clearly. But anyway.
And Marcelo, we have our engineer. There's seats over here if anybody wants to come on in.
Yeah, come on across.
We have Marcelo to thank for some great. Great. hear from you next, on your clip that is. Albert has an amazing life. Albert grew up very colorfully in Coney Island, lived in the West Village and loved that, came to the East Village with his partner, and commenced to engage with the East Village big time. And by the way, he's a very talented painter and interior decorator, to boot. So let's hear from Albert. Oh, wait a minute, let me explain. One of Albert's many accomplishments is planting this tree. Was
Yes.
the tree there?
I planted it.
Planted the tree that became the one that we like in Tompkins Square Park every Christmas, and Albert planted it, and it's dedicated to his late partner, and there is a Christmas tree lighting celebration every year.
I'm Albert Fabosi, and an East Village resident for almost 30 years. We fought to get the park renovated, because now I face this park. And every day I looked out, and it was prostitutes, homeless, cooking, it was unbelievable. The kids from the school had nowhere to play. Never did I see kids. There were no playgrounds. I said, this is crazy. Well, it turns out the mayor decided all of a sudden that the park wasn't going to be renovated because the community didn't want it. Well, when I heard that, I called the people from the Democratic Club. I said, did you hear what just happened here? I said, well, this is unacceptable. So we called the mayor right away. It was Tompkins at the time. And we said, look, I don't know who you spoke to, but we're the community also. And nobody came and asked me. I said, well, we want that park renovated. I said, and this is unacceptable. So we formed a coalition. And we went out into the streets and we picketed City Hall, we picketed the mayor's office, Madame Burr, president, screaming and yelling with signs. The members of my Democratic Club used to take tranquilizers because they were afraid of the anarchists and the squatters, all these people. And I used to look at them and laugh. I said, okay. That's what I told them. You're afraid of this? This is nothing. You don't know what fear is.
The last bit was, you don't know what fear is. So I think, between Albert's story and Marilyn's story and other people's stories, we are seeing a lot of angles on what we today call gentrification. It's a word that we apply all over the place. We mean different things when we use it. Some people maybe oversimplify. There are good and bad aspects that some people would say to having a neighborhood that's somewhat depressed. There are good and bad aspects to having a neighborhood that is wealthy. And something that Albert did was try to make the park and other parts of the neighborhood more hospitable and welcoming to essentially the middle class. He faced plenty of resistance. I think that there are people who I imagine you might still have a few enemies in the neighborhood. But you were the chairman of Community Board 3, which needed guards at times. But we all know in East Village, we have had many fights over the different renovations of Tompkins Square Park, which has had many lives. It was a parade grounds in the 19th century, maybe even part of the early 20th century. But this is a park that has had many lives, and I'm sure it ain't done yet. Any other thoughts, Liza, about your nice conversation with Albert?
Yeah, I think Albert was a wonderful interviewee and very generous with his time and also his space, which he had also designed himself and showed me. I think you spoke very well about this perspective on change, and Albert overlooks Tompkins Square Park and this tree. And so he would refer to these, the changes in the buildings that had happened in the area, some of the protests, people linking hands around Tompkins Square Park to try to prevent the change to the park. So that real sense of the importance of resistance and change, and his own feelings about that change were very clear in that interview. Really important. As well as, you know, his own personal stories and his relationship to Glenn, to his partner, who he met in the West Side Piers. Also, you know, a very important part of the village that has changed tremendously. And his experiences of Stonewall, and then his personal experiences from them. So I really.
Yeah, in these interviews, there are several graduate theses in gay history, neighborhood history, gentrification, you name it. In fact, the next person we're going to hear from, Frances Golden, is, I was going to check, is she 89 now?
No, she's 90, yeah.
Thank you. She's 91. She is a very successful literary agent, has a literary agency named after herself.
And she can dance, really.
Okay, now let's get it. So we wanted her to be here tonight, and she was going to come, and then she changed her mind and she said, I'd rather sit at home and think of new trouble to get in. So she's here in spirit, which we're going to face from Fran next. But in fact, let me show you, here's Fran with a purple streak in her hair. And she is a great fan of tenements, and we're going to hear some of her activism experience, which spans 7 decades.
I am Frances Golden. I'm going to be 90 in June, and I have lived on the Lower East Side for 70 years. And when I came here, I found nirvana, and I will die in this building. Not in a hospital, I'll die in this building. This is my home. We said urban renewal is urban removal. It's black removal. It's poor people removal, which was true. It was all of that. It was only in poor neighborhoods. So ours started by saying, we love urban renewal, but this urban renewal, the people who live here are going to be the beneficiaries of the plan and not the victims. This plan will basically take care of the people who live here. And that's what made it different from any other plan. You might be relocated from the front of the building to the back while the front was being renovated, but you were not out of the neighborhood. You might have gone from this building to the one next door while yours was being renovated, but you would not go out of the neighborhood. And we kept that promise. Nobody, anybody who lived there still lives there or died there.
So her interview is really a masterclass in activism. She co-founded the Cooper Square Committee, the Met Council on Housing. She was personal secretary for a week to W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, talk about a zealot of history. She was, of course, a socialist. I'm sure she still is. Worked for the Socialist Party, various labor efforts. And the effect that she had on East Village is palpable. We have tenements still here that wouldn't be here otherwise. Any thoughts about your conversation with Fran?
Yeah, I mean, in our conversation earlier, you talked about how, I think in this new book about St. Mark's.
There's a book called St. Mark's is Dead that is getting a lot of publicity.
That the author talks about how each narrator thinks of their youth as the best time and the time that was the most important time, and if only it were that time again, and the world would be. I mean, it's sort of extrapolating, and it's all gone downhill from there. It's interesting because she talks about 1950 being the year which was the most important for her. That was the year she worked for W.B. Du Bois, and when she ran for state senate on the American Labor Party ticket, as a young woman, who didn't have a college education. She really had already kind of started with a storm. And so, that's interesting in terms of her seeing that moment as being so interesting, because to me, it's like her whole history has been an ongoing trajectory, or just story of making huge change. Up till 3 years ago, she was really a part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. So there's all of that, as well as just kind of her roots as an activist, and why and how she became that way. Growing up in a mainly Christian community in Queens, and her father kind of almost watching as she was bullied by neighborhood kids for being Jewish, and she got into a street fight and fought for herself, and then was fighting ever since. So
That's a turning point.
yeah. And then there are other kind of moments like that through this story, but that's one where I can say, like, that's what's so great about oral history, is you can kind of see where the seeds of that began in her story. So yeah, of all of the oral histories are really interesting, and I encourage listening to that one too.
And just another theme to touch on briefly, I think kind of out in the world in general, the idea of preservation is somewhat rarefied. Must be people going to tea parties and talking about antiques or something. But a lot of the people in this room know that ain't true, and somebody like Fran, is a street fighter, and she's preserving buildings, preserving housing, and preservation is as active as an activism as there is, right?
Yeah, and in her story, there's like sort of bite-sized kind of lessons also, for those who are interested in that kind of preservation. Having parties, always having parties to celebrate the movement,
That's important.
like having food for everybody always. Things that we learn, and many of you, I'm sure, have learned, but
I'm so glad you raised that point, because we have to fight and we have to celebrate too. That's a very important part of it. We're going to take a break to introduce somebody who came in late, who we've been talking about an awful lot, Phil Hartman. Introducing you now, because our next clip is somebody who I think is important to you, and that is Jonas Mekas. Jonas Mekas, among many other things, founded the Anthology Film Archive, which I was reading on the internet today is acknowledged, I think, as perhaps the world's leading avant-garde cinema. So we'll do this, mental that to you, Phil. And he was born in Lithuania. He now lives in Brooklyn, but has done an awful lot all over the village, including East Village, and of course the Anthology Film Archive is alive and going well. As a lot of you probably know, that building was a courthouse, and having the archive there has helped to preserve this beautiful and historic building. And you want to add
I
something?
just was going to say that he actually had his first film screening, I think at 13 Avenue A, between 1st and 2nd, which some people think of as the first underground film screening in the country.
Wow, wow, another plaque, huh? So let's hear what Jonas has to say.
This is Jonas Mekas, M-E-K-A-S. And Lenny Bruce, 7th Avenue, and near 4th Street there. I walked in just by chance. It was a hot summer day, and I had to stop for a cold beer. And there's this guy telling jokes. There's not a big place. And I drinking my beer and listening. And I was amazed how I did not expect anything. I've been and seen some jokers and performers, and he was incredible. The way he was delivering it, and it was the voice and the presence. And then had my beer and walked out, but I never forgot it. And until he was arrested later, and I was arrested around the same time. I was arrested first for screening flaming creatures, and later at the writer's stage on 4th Street for Chant d'amour, Jean Genet's film. Why did I screen it? And I knew I will be arrested, of course. I even had sandwiches prepared in my pocket already, and I knew that I would be arrested. Because with independent filmmakers, we did not believe that we should license our films. It was like a taking stand against licensing and censorship. But our case helped to abandon 2-3 years later the censorship, and of course again the Bruce case, it was all at the same time. Only that really Bruce, they managed to really destroy him, but they did not destroy really us, because we knew that we knew exactly what this is all about, and that we had to do it.
We won't read his, we can read the transcript of the clip. You can read it tomorrow if you found it a bit hard to hear, but it's talking about meeting Lenny Bruce, talking about standing up for freedom of speech, and another great activist tip, you know, have sandwiches so you can be ready to get arrested. Excellent activist tip. Liza, in doing, the world of oral histories has its own code of ethics, its own approaches. They are different than what news reporters do. And I think you had a funny experience with Jonas of your two worlds colliding. A real freedom of speech hardliner, I guess, is Jonas, meeting someone with a gentler ethos.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened, Liza.
Yeah, so actually I printed out the transcript of the first few moments, and we can read this.
Okay,
together.
and where were you? Did you bring this?
I interviewed him, in his house in
my script.
Yes, here's your script. So I interviewed him at his home in Clinton Hill, which will be in this, and which is also kind of his archive. And he himself is, documentarian, filmmaker, poet, creator, curator, and continues to be going strong at 92, 93.
The Times even featured him recently, and they've seen as an example of how to live when you're an older person. Just keep going.
So, but he has an enormous amounts of notes, journals, and films of his own life, and just interactions with people and conversations with people. So this experience of being interviewed and interviewing others is something was familiar with. So this moment when I began, and I sort of obviously I knew about who he was, and I wanted to impress him, and but this happened. So I think if you're Jonas, then you start. So.
Okay. So Liza walks through the door, and Jonas says, "I think we should always start immediately. Walk in, you start."
So I didn't walk in through. This is after 5-10 minutes of talking.
Oh.
And setting things up and talking about the project and what it is and informing him about the project and everything.
Okay.
So he's already bored with me, and he. So this is what he says.
And then I said, "I think we should always start immediately. Walk in, you start."
Okay, so here we are. We've started.
That's a good piece of advice. May 23rd, 2014, Brooklyn, Clinton Hill area, talking about the Lower East Side.
At the East Village.
Greenwich Village, Lower East Side, East Side.
Yes, this is Liza Zapol. It's the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation Oral History Project.
And this is Jonas Mekas, Mekas.
Thank you, Jonas. If you can say in a sentence or two who you are.
I am a filmmaker and a writer and curator of film. And on and on.
Yes.
A few more paragraphs about who it is.
Yes. So, I think in that moment you kind of see that there's this
Schooling you.
He's schooling me, yeah, and he's also like, okay, let's go, here, this is the place, and normally that's something that I would do, is kind of say where we are and who's speaking, and then ask him to introduce himself, so he's kind of saying, I know this already.
Right.
And here's the way you should be doing it. So, and that was, and I also enjoyed that, I mean, but it's different because as a documentarian, or for him, you do start rolling from the beginning. You want to capture it all. And for an oral historian, it's about making sure that the person you're interviewing knows about the project, accepts the terms of the project, that they're comfortable with those before you start, that you try as much as you can to have the power dynamics at least transparent, if not also trying to make the other person feel like they're in control of the project. So yes, he was controlling the project in his way, but that it was, but that prelude that I do is kind of a part of the work of oral history, among other things. So like you and I have had many dialogues about, it's a lengthy process where the interview is transcribed and then it's given back to the interviewees and then they have the chance to review the transcript. Those of you who were interviewed in this room know this. It's an opportunity for people to see if there's something in there that they don't want to be made public, that they don't feel comfortable with. So this idea that they can share in that process.
Sure. And that's great. So what we're going to do now is maybe turn up the lights a little bit. We can open the doors, get the air flowing, wake up and take some questions, and we're going to talk more about these themes. I might have a few more questions for Liza. I don't know if she'll have a question for me. I hope not. But yeah, we'll wake up a little bit. We've heard the clips that we're going to share, and there is so much more for you all to enjoy right here tomorrow. It's just a wealth, if I do say so myself. Thanks to Liza, and thanks to you all who participated.